Okay, so let's get mad with drip irrigation. And I don't mean mad. I just mean M.A.D, manageable, allowable depletion. And we're going to be talking about that. And I'd be amiss if I didn't go and actually include some acknowledgments for two of my our grad students, Ivy Mary and Shrava, along with my co-investigator, Shinhua, who is an ag engineer and really the specialist with irrigation and watering. I come with the specialty of growing plants, and she knows how to make sure that the water system's running correctly. So we really make a nice team on that. Let's see if this works. You gotta be smarter than that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about drip irrigation. Of course, I'm gonna generally just go and make that comparison against overhead irrigation, because in North Dakota, either you have center pivots or you do drip irrigation. There's probably no in between there. We don't have anyone who's doing any kind of flood irrigation at all. So drip irrigation, of course, it's a great way of going and delivering a slow amount of water over multiple times or, a short period of time. But the main thing I want to emphasize is it's the best way when you have a low pressure distribution system. So you don't have to dig a well to go and utilize drip irrigation, which is good in comparison, especially to center pivots. It's highly efficient. When you look at ways of water use efficiency, drip irrigation is right there at the top. The only thing that might be a little bit better is when you have buried drip irrigation, but that's going to cost a lot more to install than just regular drip irrigation. It does go and minimize your water loss. I mean, you got your drip tape right there on the soil surface, so you have a lot less evaporation of water, especially compared to your overhead irrigation. It even gets better when you go and have it underneath a plastic mulch, because that really conserves that moisture, and you lose a lot less. And it works also that you get less runoff, because you're putting on that small amount over a period of time. And small is, maybe that's not the correct word, a minimal amount versus when you have your center pivots, you're putting out a heck of a lot more water, because they have to get around 160 acres or so in one day, or their whole system's kind of screwed up. So they're putting out a lot of water, going around relatively quickly, so there's a lot more chance if you have any kind of topography, which I noticed this is really nice topography. I come from a very flat area in Fargo. I mean, people have to go and use the dike or overpasses just to go sledding in the winter, because there is no topography. So, but if you had any kind of topography, any kind of rolling hill, the drip irrigation is going to be, you're not going to lose your soil. It isn't going to be running down those rows like it would with overhead irrigation. And, a wide range of crops and soils. You don't have to worry about, if you had the Fargo clay and you needed to go and irrigate for these high value crops or specialty crops, which you would need to, you wouldn't have to worry about, saturating that soil. If you had an overhead or center pivot, you definitely would be saturating that soil, because it's so fine clay that it just doesn't percolate in very fast. And that's why there's lots of problems around our area. Okay, I keep wanting to hit the wrong button. Okay, so you decided you're going to use drip because it's relatively cheap and it's very efficient. So how are you going to go and determine just how and when to irrigate? I mean, how much are you supposed to be putting on those darn plants? You know they need water, but just how much? And every crop has different water requirements. And even within that crop, there's special times where it's really important to go and make sure that that plant receives sufficient amount of water. I've been doing a number of trials looking at deficit irrigation with fruit trees. And there, yeah, you got a perennial. So there's times where you can go and conserve your water use by not giving the plant as much water. But there's times that you have to make sure that you supply sufficient water or you're going to be in trouble. Now with annuals, we don't have that flexibility, but there are points where, like from fruit set for our vegetables, and don't get me started on fruits versus vegetables things, but so tomatoes, peppers, when you got your flowering and you got you have your fruit set to when you harvest, that is really, really important to go and make sure that that plant is receiving what it needs for its water. So we used to do it by this old checkbook method, where you go and figured out what was going in, how much water you applied, what the plant was utilizing, and just like you would with the checkbook on how much money was coming into your account, how much money was going out, that was the way that you balanced the irrigation. That's the way you scheduled whether or not you had to go and irrigate, because you're figuring out transpiration, how much water that plant would be using. Oh, time to go and irrigate. Nowadays, we have these sensors. It makes it much simpler. And the important thing is you get them in the right location so that you can figure out just what the plant is actually sucking up for water and knowing how much it needs. So here's our M.A.D, or M.A.D, as I would put it. So it refers to this plant available water. So I like to utilize this. So here's a soil column. And from field capacity up here, that's saturation. So if you had this column of soil and you just poured a whole bunch of water and it's full. There's no air spaces in the soil. That would be saturation. But after a little bit of time, unless you had a clay, that water that wasn't held to those soil colloids, that would leach through, and you'd get to field capacity. That's where the water that's there is held onto those soil colloids, and it isn't going to go down. So you go from there down to permanent wilt. So permanent wilt is when that plant root system can't pull that water away from the soil colloids. It's held there so tightly that the plant doesn't have enough strength in that root to suck that up. And so that's called permanent wilt. We get to that point, and unless the plant really gets some water quickly, that's it. So in between there, that's where we have our available water holding capacity. So if we want, so like here is 40 to 50% available water capacity in there. So what we're doing is we're looking at two levels. We have a 10% and a 30% M.A.D. So we're not down this far. We're up in this area. And we looked at that versus a time-based, which we, after a lot of trial and error, finally came up with, okay, this is what our high tunnel needs. You know, the fact that you have a high tunnel, you don't get rainfall. So you need, anything the plant gets is only coming from you putting in that water. So the benefits of using M.A.D is you don't have to worry about over irrigation or under irrigation because the system is automatic. When it gets down to this level that we've determined, it fills back up. And this over irrigation is probably more of a problem than, because it's difficult to see when you're at this, maybe a little bit above field capacity, and there's less air in that soil for those roots. And, well, we all know what flooding will do. Well, plants are less capable to deal with over irrigation, and it's real subtle, but over time, it really zaps the energy out of the plants than to go and be in that, anywhere in this area, So this helps to prevent that as well as under irrigation. By having this up, down, you are promoting deeper root development, which is going to be good. Anytime, if you have all your roots at the very top, you basically have very little capability of, they're all right here, and if you don't go and get them water up there and it goes down here, they can't get to it. So anytime you can go and lengthen that root profile, it's going to be advantageous and helps them overcome some of that drought characteristics. And this also, we're kind of blessed that we don't have water scarcity, that we have to really, that water is a premium price, but in some locations it is a premium price, and it's really important to go and conserve as much water as you can. So, that helps with that as well. Where did my mouse go? Now the button works. So, our trial had 3 objectives. We wanted to go and really construct this remote sensing irrigation system with drip. And we were putting it on tomatoes and peppers in a high tunnel as well as outside because we wanted to make that comparison, although statistically we can't. And we were going to use black plastic and drip irrigation. We had 2 lines, 1 on each side of the plants. We had 8 cultivars of paste tomatoes and 8 cultivars of bell peppers. And our 3 irrigations, I've already alluded to this time-based one, 10% M.A.D. and then 30% M.A.D. Okay, this is where we did it. Our hort farm is near the town of Absaraka, and originally the gentleman that decided this is where the horticulture research farm he said, okay, I'm not going to go and do research in the Red River Valley. So all of North Dakota used to be Lake Agassiz. And along the Red River Valley, it's pretty much, we call it Fargo clay. I think that is the actual term. So nothing but clay. So Dr. Herman went and he found the first beach ridge from Lake Agassiz, and after that, it starts to be like what the rest of the state. So you get to be here, and all this way, it becomes a sandy loam, and maybe a little bit more sandier in some areas, but so we wanted something that represented most of the state instead of the Red River Valley. So that's why we get to drive 40 minutes every day to go to our research site. Yay. Okay, so here are our 8 pepper and tomato cultivars. And you can see they're, basically we have orange and then more reds. And then this early sensation was like a light lemon lime green, and it was much smaller, so it produced a lot more in comparison to the others. As far as tomatoes, we had You know, you think paste tomatoes are all Romas. No, they're not. We have, and hopefully I have some pictures in there. We have something that looks like you're basically almost like a beefsteak or a big boy to your typical San Marzano, which is your typical little Roma type tomato for paste. And that just shows in our high tunnel how we got our 3 reps for our 3 irrigation treatments with the 8 cultivars of each, all jammed into a 34 by 96 high tunnel. Okay, so some background information. You can see with that sand, silt, and clay amount, we have a sandy loam. And this becomes important a little bit later. Our 30% field capacity and 15% was what it said was our permanent wilt. So when we did a soil release curve, though, what we found was that it didn't quite work with what it was supposed to work. So if we were to figure out our M.A.D., our 10% M.A.D., first of all, here is to figure out our available water. We take our field capacity minus that permanent wilt, and then that ends up that we have 0.2. So we take that, and then we multiply it by that 10%. So that tells us that to have that 10% deletion, we need 2%. So we go from our field capacity, we minus our 2%, and that says we're at 0.28 or 28%. Well, if we went to 28%, now here's our soil release curve, but our 28% puts us right here at about 23 or so. Now, if we looked at the 30, we get to 0.24. So 0.24, because this release curve didn't quite do with what everything was, our 0.24 would be just about right here. So what we did was we actually worked this out with we did our own soil release curves instead of what the soils department sent us, and we found out that this is what we need it to be at. So for our 10%, we need it to be at 14%, minus 14 kilopascals, and then minus 24 cinibars for our 30%. And so that's why I have the question mark around, was that really the soil release curve? And that was the first thing that made us have to go back and do some recalculations. So here is what is set up for our irrigation. This goes and determines just when to turn things on and when to shut things off. So we have, you can see we have 3 controllers. We have 3 irrigation treatments, so each one of those is being controlled. We need our flow meter because we want to figure out just how much water we put on and what our water use efficiency was. Of course, we need to record that because no one's going to be sitting there writing down these numbers, even if we could. And then our solenoid is going to be turning that on and off. And it's all set up in this nice little box. We didn't need to really have it protected, but we have the same thing outside. So out there, we did need to kind of protect that stuff. Okay, so for our time treatment, we had to figure out just how to go and apply the amount of water that we wanted to. And this goes through some of just figuring that out, by figuring out we had 8 plants per plot, and our length of our plot, and our width, and then our drip tape, how long that was, how much total area there. So with our flow rate and utilizing that, putting it over 100 foot, we needed to put out that 0.5 to 8 gallons per minute. And with that and 2 drip lines, we figured out we needed to run it for 24 minutes. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we have 3 days between with our weekend, but every other day during the week. And since there's 7 days in a week, it's a little hard to make those kind of things actually even, but that's the way we did it. There was no easy way to go and make that even for 3. Okay, so that ended up that with our time-based, we had it come on at 9 o'clock and run for 24 minutes, and we found out that it went down about 6 inches, 0.6 inches depth. For our M.A.D, we only got down to 1/4 of an inch at a time, and with our 30%, we're down to 1/2 inch. And this was based on our soil release curves and the time-based, I already talked about that. So here's again that controller, and here's our solenoids that turn that on and off. So what happens is with these, you can see it gets watered 3 times a day, every day, versus we're going longer, but we have longer intervals with our time-based. And that's a lot better than going and utilizing, let's go and on a daily basis, let's go feel the soil and how much does it stick together to know whether or not to irrigate. So here's our watermark sensors. This is what we're using to find our water capacity and how dry that soil is getting in the root zone where our plants are. So we have these, not by every plant, but per treatment, we have them at the 6 and 12 inch depth, so that we know at 6 inch, that's probably where in the middle of where most of our roots are, and at 12 inch, we're getting few roots that are going down that far. And then the soil click is the one that goes, and when it gets to the water potential that we need, it tells the controller, hey, time to turn the water on. And so the controller then goes and flicks the solenoid so it comes on and waters. And our flow meter then tells us how much water is going through, and you can see we're growing our tomatoes. So then, yes?
Is that automatic? How much water does it put on? I mean, is it just up to the M.A.D?
Right, no, so excellent question. So the question was, so how long does it flow? So what it does is when it gets down to, remember I got that soil column? When it gets down to that 30%, it clicks on. When it gets up to field capacity, it shuts off. So excellent question, and I should have said that. Good point. So this is all the data. Luckily, most of this was all automatic with a weather station, but soil and our other our data logger that was in with our irrigation. So soil water potential, flow data. Here we can go and get our photosynthetic active radiation. Of course, we have thermistors for the air temperature, relative humidity. We have sensors for our soil moisture and temperature, reference evaporation, rainfall for outside. We didn't need that for inside. And then the only thing that the graduate students really needed to do was harvest the peppers and tomatoes, and then determine marketable, unmarketable, and the yields. So let's first look at some of the air temperatures. What we found was that 2022 is rather different than 2023. We couldn't combine that. So you can see the air temperature inside and outside. Excuse me. So just like when Shannon was talking, when you get those clear days, inside tends to go much higher. But if we have a cloudy day, you don't get that kind of heat up in your high tunnel in comparison to maybe outside. 2023, you don't see that the inside was that much higher than the outside. We had a lot of smoke from the Canadian wildfires, and so there was like, you know, even a clear day was hazy. So we didn't get this kind of, you know, it was all about the same in 2023. And maybe, I can't remember, but maybe we had that problem here in 2022. No, that was inside, that was higher, yes. Got things a little mixed up there. So, oh, and then, well, no, I'll talk about that here. No. This is our outside setup. So we wanted to mimic what we had inside. And in a high tunnel, you're going to trellis your tomatoes. So we utilized T-posts and rebar and then made a trellis for the outside so that it would mimic what we had on the inside, and pruning it to a single, double leader because we have paste tomatoes. So we went with a double leader, both inside and outside, so that things were identical, although the statisticians still said you can't make statistical comparisons. I can make numerical comparisons, though, and that's a whole nother story. So, this is the average air temperature of the high tunnel from June 15th to October 21st inside, and then also our GDDs, so accumulated growing degree days, and you can see that this is the open field and this is the high tunnel, so we do get, and I'm sorry for putting this in metric. I should have converted it, but time and didn't even notice that when I was putting that together. Also, open field 2023, and then the high tunnel. And that's the whole thing about averages that really goes and irks me, is an average, you know, if you have a min and a max that this far apart, they'll have this average. Now, if you had that same, like here, it'd still have that same average. But it didn't show you the drastic fluctuation. And so, but that's what we have. So we ended up having more growing degree days, and even with cooler days, we had 1 to 6 degrees of Celsius higher in the high tunnel than the open field. And that's what we would expect. So what we did on this was we knew we could get into the high tunnel sooner than we could in the open field. So we ended up starting, instead of having the plants at the same age that we started them at the same age, then you put them into the field, and the fact that we can get into the high tunnel a month earlier, you know, is it good for the open field because now you have kind of overgrown transplants that you put into the field? So we decided that we would just start them at different times. So we started them about a month difference, and you can see then we transplanted them a month difference. And of course, when you have them in there sooner, you can see you're going to go and harvest, get your first harvest, well, a month, at least a month sooner. And this is the whole problem for North and South Dakota, having tomatoes outside. You know, if you have to wait till August to finally get some fruit, it's, you know, you don't have a lot of time to go and reap the benefits and have a good return on investment. So, and you can see how, you know, it wasn't as warm in 2023 as 2022, so things were even further delayed. Oh, and then you can see much more difference as far as the last harvest when we, in 2022 versus 2023. Now here we got 8 to 10 more days in the high tunnel, and here we had, you know, about 20 days, maybe not 8 to 20 days. And again, getting back to what Shannon was talking about with the losing your radiant heat with those big surface of the pepper leaves and how they got scorched a lot quicker than the tomatoes. Okay, in 2022, we did have some problems, which we resolved. We were growing these seedlings in an older greenhouse, which was being shared with a lot of people walking through different rooms and like that. And we ended up having some tomato spotted wilt virus. 2023, what we did to rectify that is we went to the new greenhouse and rented some space so that we could start those without that kind of problem. We did find that certain cultivars were more susceptible than others. As far as results, now with tomatoes, I'm going to put them both up here. We didn't have any interaction. We thought we'd see an interaction between our irrigation treatments and our cultivars, but we didn't. Basically, we had both of those main effects were significant. So cultivars affected our marketable weight, and you can see that Granadero was, and Carolina, these are both rather medium-sized, kind of like, they look almost like a Big Boy, a little bit smaller than that. Had our highest yield, but that was only better than when we look at Big Mama, which is much bigger, and then Gladiator, as well as San Marzera and Super Sauce. Also, you can tell the 3 Roma types. Those were the 3 Roma types. The other ones were much larger. That's why they had fewer fruit. In 2023, we had significant differences in our irrigation, in which both using our 10% and 30% M.A.D. Am I that close? No, you scared me. 10% and 30% M.A.D. out-yielded our time-based irrigation. Even though we had all those fluctuations in our cultivars, the 10 and 30% M.A.D. Gave us a significant better yield. And we had even, you know, these aren't different, but you could tell that there was a little bit drier, so our 30% is going to have better water use efficiency. When we looked in 2023, again, here is the differences that we saw from high tunnel to open field. You can see why in North and South Dakota we would promote a high tunnel for tomatoes, no matter if they were paste or fresh market. You're going to get a much higher yield in comparison to your open field. And the same goes true for the number of fruit. Again, not that much different, in which this time, instead of Granadero, now Pisano did much better in 2023 than 2022. But night and day difference when you put them side by side, the open field versus the high tunnel. What I thought was interesting was the pH of the tomato fruit. I was talking with somebody in the food science area, and she was, actually they did a study. They were looking at all the commercial available tomato cultivars, and she said over the years they've been working more and more on getting flavor. Well, to go and get that flavor, what they've done is they've actually increased the pH of those fruit. And she, she's one of these food safety kind of people, and she goes, a lot of these tomatoes, they're above what we want to do any kind of canning. So you have to be really, aware of that, if you don't have your pH below that 4.5, which is desirable, if they're doing canning and we have paste tomatoes, that's really important. And so you see how we etched up with some of these more with the high tunnel than we did. We had a lot more fluctuation in the open field. As far as sweetness in the tomatoes, the desirable range is between 4 and 6. And we see that with Carolina, we really, that was the sweetest one in the high tunnel. So we also noticed that, okay, we're getting a lot more fruit production in the high tunnel. So everything's a give and take. So you get more fruit, but that means that some of these characteristics might be decreasing. So in comparison to the open field. So we see that we've lost some of the sweetness in some of these cultivars in comparison to the open field, just by the lower numbers. Now, titratable acidity, that's not your pH. So we want that to be, for paste tomatoes, between 0.4 and 0.8. And you can see where in the open field, because of the stress, more of the stress, they were much higher than we were in the high tunnel. And some pretty drastic differences when we look at titratable acidity. And really, lots of variability in the open field, not so much here where we had some of these, Pisano, Gladiator, Granadero, San Marzano were way low along with Super Sauce, and these were a little bit higher, which were in that more close to that range that we wanted. Okay, moving on to peppers. For peppers, we did see we had an interaction that the cultivars didn't respond similarly to our irrigation. So what we're looking at here is how they did down this. We're looking at how these cultivars did at each of these. And that's why I have these numbers that way. And what we saw was that at 10% M.A.D, our highest yielder was King Arthur, and our lowest was Orange Blaze. When we went to 30%, our highest was King Arthur again, along with Red Knight, and our lowest that time was Olympus. And then on our time base, you can see they tended to be a little bit lower, but our highest was Olympus, and our lowest, was Orange Blaze. Now, if we looked at it the other way, in which we look at these that way. So, for each of these cultivars, which is the best irrigation treatment that we want? And if there is any differences. So, these are the only ones that had differences that responded differently to our irrigation. And so with early sun, we had higher yields with our 10 and 30% M.A.D treatments than with our time-based. And the same was true with King Arthur. But with Olympus, our 10% and our time-based was better than our 30%. So maybe Olympus is a little bit more sensitive to that drying that is occurring. The same can be true. Now we're looking at marketable number, and I'm just going to go through. With these, they pretty much mimic what we see for yield. And so the ones that did well, and then those, basically there was only two differences here. These compared to here, but here we had a lot more variability with our 30%. And again, with 10%, we had only these two differences. So with that 30%, there seemed to be more response that some of these cultivars might be a little bit more sensitive to the degree of drying that we had before we filled it up. Now we look at that other direction again, and pretty much the same thing that we saw for the yield, so I'm not going to spend much time with that. We did have some problems with unmarketables with this, in which that was just by cultivar, and you can see here with Ninja, we had a lot of sun burning and some blossom end rot that occurred with that. And it was just basically this one cultivar that seemed to be not liking what we had to offer in North Dakota for weather. So when we start looking at irrigation amounts, pretty good time. When we look at the amount of water that was applied, what we see is, we are applying more water inside than outside in general. When you look at inside versus outside for tomatoes, outside you get some rainfall, so then you don't need to irrigate on that. Higher demand, we got bigger plants inside, we got more evapotranspiration occurring than the outside. As far as 10% M.A.D. Versus 30%, and then our time base, you can see how that fluctuates. A little hard to go and pull any real information out of 2022 because it really kind of moved around a lot. Seemed a lot more typical in 2023, where we had that stair-stepping as far as we applied more water in the time base versus the 10% and less in the 30%. That's what we would have expected versus some of the things that were happening here. And some of that could have been from, that an emitter isn't quite working right, or, there could be a number of things that cause some of those differences. So when we kind of put all of that stuff together, we can see that the yields for the tomatoes and peppers, this is on kilograms per plant, and highlighted our top ones, even though that's no statistics, but you can see how the inside generally was doing better than the outside as we expected, but to the degree, when you look at 6 kilograms versus just over 1 kilogram, that's quite a drastic difference. As far as water use efficiency, so because of our differences in our water use in 2022, we see things kind of flip around a little bit. That isn't quite what one would have expected. So the higher is the better water use efficiency. So that's actually putting your yield over the amount of water that you're using. So you can see how that kind of fluctuates. Yield over the amount of water that you're using. So when you use more water, you're going to have that ends up, water over water. So if you have a higher yield and you're using this amount of water, you're going to have a higher number. So what we see here is that with the peppers inside, our 10% M.A.D had better water use efficiency, but we couldn't really do statistics on this. We can see that we have better water use efficiency inside than outside. In 2023, things kind of flipped a little bit, in which we have this great water use efficiency with 10% M.A.D in comparison to the other two for outside. And for inside, it seemed like our time base was doing better. So do we have things all figured out? Probably not. But we've started to really understand what we need to do as far as controlling the amount of water. So we know that high tunnels are beneficial for vegetable production, especially in North and South Dakota. We should have had high tunnels long time ago to take advantage of that season extension. Irrigation scheduling is a great way of knowing exactly how much water you are applying, and applying the amount of water that once we figure out what these various cultivars need, you can more exactly apply that for them. With paste tomatoes, cultivar selection was key. Didn't seem that you could really make a lot of difference in your marketable yields by what you selected to grow, and that our 10 and 30% M.A.D did much better in 2023. With bell peppers, again, the cultivar selection was key. You saw those differences, but there was that interaction, and there were more unmarketables in the open field. Water use, as I just said, it's still a conundrum. And, this didn't have, I don't think we didn't choose the right one. There's a new publication that just came out, and I had my email address, but it came out from the University of Purdue on water management for small farms. And it's 5 chapters, 40-some or so pages, and it has a lot of information to really go through on irrigation for mainly like drip irrigation that they talk about, blossom end rot, and yellow shoulders, and how water can go and influence that, as well as nutrients. And I wanted to get to that. It's on the very last one.
Okay.
Or second to last one, I think. I'm kind of old school, in which, all those youngsters would just have a little barcode, and you'd say, oh yeah, put your phone up and take you right to the location. Well, I haven't quite mastered that yet. So if we get to the right one.
We will. It's just taking a minute.
I have my email address, and you can take your phone, take a picture. I've gotten that far. And you can take a picture, and I'll send you that PDF if you email me and say, hey, yeah, nope. Yeah, there it is. Yes, I'm sorry. And this is this is the title page on it. Then it has more information about all the people at the engineers and like that at Purdue. But it's called Water Management for Vegetable Crops on Small Farms. Send me an email. I'll get out of the way. And I'll send you the PDF, because, a lot of this stuff, it takes a bit to think it through and really kind of figure it out. But, water is really, really important for any kind of vegetable production. And so getting on that adequate amount and not overdoing it. And that's, I think that's a hidden cost that we kind of miss. And it's like, oh, you can't irrigate it too much. Well, yeah, you can. And those plants really struggle if they've been that kind of a stress from over irrigation. They're much more easily to jump back from under irrigation. And actually, we've shown that sometimes having that water stress goes and actually increases some of your anthocyanins, some other polyphenolics, and the health attributes. But over irrigation never helps with any of those qualities. So with that, I should go and probably thank our specialty crop block grant for the funding on this, and then some of the people that helped with getting some of those things set up. And if there's any questions, I have a few minutes. Yes?
So with all this water management, have you done anything with any of the butane-based osmotic controls?
I have not. I'm more of the, like I said, I'm the high tunnel producer. I know about, so we were always just using that time-based, and Chinois goes, oh, you can do much better. And so we started with looking at M.A.D, and I suppose you could, but, yeah.
What I'm getting at is that the butane supposedly will reduce the amount of fluctuation in the plant.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can manage a little better on that, and I'm thinking about more on the low-use water side, we might be able to retain more water. I just want to know if there's any data out there to support that
Well,
from you guys.
yeah. I'll get your email address and I'll write a note to myself and I'll get back to you on that, because I'll talk with Chinois, who's our water specialist and does a lot more of that aspect. And so, but excellent question. Yeah.
Do you expect, first of all, do you expect these cultivars to perform similarly south, depending on South Dakota here, as opposed to North Dakota location? And what was, like from Shannon's presentation earlier, what was the frost-free time period?
Right. So we probably lose about 7 to 10 days in comparison, and that can fluctuate. I've been at NDSU for almost 25 years, and I can say I don't think I've had one year that's ever been the same. And having lived in Sioux Falls for some years, I know how things can all of a sudden, and my mom lives in northeast Nebraska, so I call there and I say, hey, and sometimes you guys can have colder weather than we have. But in general, it's only about seven, maybe 10 days difference as far as your growing season, your length of the season. And it's probably much closer with a high tunnel than in the open field.
Cultivar performance about the same.
I would imagine it would be. Now, we have our high tunnels facing north and south because we want to take advantage of the wind coming through, and I think, seeing all the windmills that I saw, I think you guys do too, so to go and cool down and not have that expense. A lot of our growers don't have electricity hooked up to their high tunnels. They might have a solar panel to go and automatically raise and lower. But when you can use Mother Nature to help cool down things versus running a bunch of fans to try to cool things down, it's much nicer. And then, in the heat of the summer, putting over a shade cloth to help reduce, because in the middle of the summer, we get plenty of light. It's later on at the ends of those seasons that we don't. So that would also help reduce some of those temperatures quite a bit.